Welcome back to today's video. In today's video, we are going to cover a pretty controversial topic in the neuro rehab world, and that is compensation versus facilitation. In this video, you're going to learn what these two terms mean, why there's so much debate as to what is the most appropriate treatment protocol after a neurologic injury, and of course, by the end of this video, my hope is that it'll help you to decide which path is best for you, facilitation or compensation. And yes, there is a time and a place for compensation. Now, for any of you that are really confused, don't worry, we're going to go into what these two terms mean, why for some of you they could actually be hurting your brain's ability to rewire, and helping you to feel more empowered to take the next best steps in your neurologic rehabilitation to optimize your overall recovery. If you're new to this channel, I'm Tara. I'm a neurologic physical therapist with over 22 years of experience helping people restore their mobility and their independence after a neurologic injury. And I've taken everything I've learned over the 22 years and I've put it into a software system that is part of our Rehab HQ membership program. As a member, you get access to PDF handouts, ad-free videos, monthly webinars, monthly Q&As, and a discussion board where you can interact with me and other members in the community. To learn more about our membership program and to sign up, you can visit rehab-hq.com. And now back to our video where we are going to do a deep dive into compensation versus facilitation. So when I say the word compensation, what I'm referring to is there is some treatment protocols after a neurologic injury that focus primarily on teaching you how to use your uninjured arm and leg to restore your independence. We call that compensation. Now, when I say the word facilitation, another word I often will say in videos is quality movement. Strategies that focus on facilitation are more geared towards normalizing movement on the involved side of the body. So an example of compensation would be giving someone a cane, teaching them how to use it in their strong arm to walk. Someone who leans more towards a facilitation technique, or a clinician that leans more towards a facilitation technique, might hold off on putting that cane in the uninvolved arm and instead prioritize restoring the body's ability to stand on a weaker leg. Many times in these videos, I call those like stance control activities. Another example of potentially a compensatory technique is a therapist who leans more towards compensation will focus a lot on walking speed or walking distance, regardless of how it looks. So your leg could be swinging out to the side, your knee could be locking out when you're standing on it, but a therapist that leans more towards compensation would prioritize speed and distance, whereas a therapist that is focused more or leans more, prioritizes more towards normalizing movement or facilitation would probably slow that walking speed down, decrease that walking distance a little bit, and work on the quality. So if someone's knee's hyperextending, we would work on not letting your knee hyperextend when you're standing on it. If you swing your leg out to the side, we might slow the walking down a little bit and decrease the distance a little bit while we try and normalize that walking pattern. Now, if you've been around here for a while, you know that this channel really kind of leans more towards facilitation over compensation. And that's not necessarily because I believe that facilitation is the best strategy for everyone. The reason this channel primarily focuses on that is because of my experience in the system and learning that the entire healthcare system is very much focused on compensation. So I hope you guys are following me so far. But again, I don't think one is better than the other one. It really depends on the person, the type of stroke they had, the size of their stroke, and their overall life circumstances, how much caregiver support they have, do they need to be independent because they live alone? All of those factors need to be considered when we're deciding, or when I'm deciding, which path to go down. So I want to be very clear on that I am not a believer that everyone should be working on facilitation. And don't worry, by the end of this video, I promise you, you're gonna be in control and feel probably better about the choices that you're making as far as choosing the exercises that you focus on at home. Before we get into what might be best for you, it is really important to go into a little bit of history as to why we see so much controversy of which approach is better, facilitation or compensation. And it goes back to early 80s and before, where the scientific community was really quite confident that the adult brain could not rewire. So if you had any type of a brain injury, those brain cells were gone and you would not get any of the functions back that those brain cells were responsible for. So the logical way to structure a rehab program was to work on compensation. Let's teach someone how to be independent with the remaining brain cells, i.e. primarily the side of the body that was not affected by the stroke. Then in the 90s and early 2000s, there was more and more evidence coming out just because of better imaging studies that they could do of the brain, or taking pictures of the brain were a little bit more clear. And they could actually see that an adult brain can build new neural networks. And so the strategies, the treatment strategies like NDT, some of you know what that is. You've heard of that before. Bow bath, because you leave it in the comments. I'm only mentioning these words for those of you that kind of have been following all of the different types of stroke treatment strategies. A lot of those techniques were facilitation techniques that really started to gain popularity. Then came the late 1990s and early 2000s when managed care came in. Now, managed care was kind of like the babysitter of the purse, for lack of a better term, when it comes to healthcare spending. That's not really important for this overall discussion, but it is a component that creates a continued tension in this rehab world as to what is the best practice guideline for someone who's had a stroke. So just be mindful of that. Late 1990s, early 2000s, managed care came in to attempt to make the healthcare system more efficient. Very, very simplified, a little bit more complicated than that, but an important component of the evolution of the practice guidelines for stroke. Also around that time, there was a lot of robotic devices that were coming to the market. In particular, body weight supported treadmill training systems, which basically a lot of them had exoskeletons on them, and they put you on a treadmill and they could facilitate a normal walking pattern, which seems like a great solution, right? We're trying to normalize walking and we're trying to manage healthcare resources. And so if a robot could facilitate a normal walking pattern with a patient, it cut down on the amount of staff, that's licensed staff, that's required for a treatment session, and it was normalizing the walking pattern. But what's really important to get things covered by insurance is data and science. So with the emergence of these devices came the plethora of studies to prove that high intensity gait training improved outcomes. So there were studies that concluded that if you could increase someone's walking speed, you would decrease their falls and decrease their rate of readmission, or the potential for a readmission. But those studies that were really proving that high intensity gait training or gait speed improved outcomes, we really ran with that. And then more and more studies started coming out correlating gait speed with improved outcomes. Now, add to that the facilitation community wasn't really able to prove that facilitation techniques improved outcomes on a standardized test, further leading to more and more high intensity gait training programs. Not just because potentially it decreased the amount of staff that you could use, but also gait speed is very measurable and it can occur, you can reach that goal in a pretty short amount of time. Whereas a facilitation technique where a human, a skilled clinician, has to be licensed and trained to facilitate movement on the injured side of the body or the weaker side of the body is costly, and rewiring a damaged side of the brain takes a lot longer. It takes a lot more repetition, and there just weren't really enough resources to come up with a good protocol that could be efficiently and cost effectively facilitated in the healthcare system that we have in the US. So why do I tell you all that? Because many of you, your facilities are still very, very focused on high intensity walking or gait speed or gait distance, walking distance. And to be honest with you, they're not wrong. Now, let's come to the videos that I have on this channel, and I'll explain to you my evolution a little bit. I was very much in the facilitation camp, pretty much from the beginning. The very first job I had, shout out to Susie in Vero Beach, Florida, was an amazing job. And all the staff there were trained and certified in facilitation techniques. So you can kind of say that's kind of the way I was born and bred as a therapist, because it was my first job and it worked and it was effective. I'll never forget the first time that I unlocked someone's knee when they were standing on their leg, and I was floored that someone could support their body weight without locking their knee out, because I just assumed that you had to lock someone's knee out in order to be able to get them to support their body weight on that leg. And so that was very eye-opening for me. And so I never really bought into this idea of just locking someone's leg out and letting them walk with like a peg leg. And then the more I practiced, the more I kind of dove deeper and deeper into this facilitation world. All right. So very much hands-on, facilitate normal movement patterns. But then I kind of bought into the whole robotic body weight supported treadmill training. And I thought this would be like a perfect marriage. And at one time, I even really fought very, very hard for a hospital that I worked for us to get one of these body weight supported treadmill training systems, because I thought it was like heaven on earth. You could facilitate normal movement patterns. You could get a lot more repetitions in with a more normalized walking pattern, and it felt like the end all be all. But then I saw the complete shift happen within our healthcare system, where they really kind of bought into this idea that like they could replace therapists with these machines. On top of that, school was now teaching more high intensity gait training. So I was seeing more students coming out of school that's all they were doing. They had no idea how to facilitate movement, and it was just compensation, compensation, compensation. Add to that managed care, remember that's still humming in the background. There's always a push to cut down on treatment times, use less skilled staff to make sure that hospitals are making money. And I was not on board with that. So enter in me leaving the hospital, starting to treat patients privately, and then starting Rehab HQ on YouTube. Now, the main goal for Rehab HQ, now stay with me here. For those of you that are new, don't worry. This is all going to make sense when we get to the end of this. So Rehab HQ was really my opportunity to say, okay, if they're going to work on high intensity gait training with all of your sessions your 12 sessions per calendar year, 20 sessions per calendar year, I wanted to make sure that patients also had activities that they could be doing at home to facilitate normal movement patterns. And that brings me to the inspiration of this video and a patient that I've just started working with that is very early on in their stroke rehab recovery, meaning the brain is very, very ripe for neuro rewiring, i.e., facilitation type techniques. And their question to me is, should we be working on high intensity gait training? Or should we spend more time on facilitation? And is the case with many of my patients, they are going to an in-network provider where they are in the system. And of course, all they're doing in therapy is working on gait, speed, and compensation, not just with the arm, not just with the leg and walking, but with the arm and leg. And so the question is that bad? Should they not go to their in-network or not use their benefits and just come to me, and which I am out of network? And my answer is, for all of you, because you're all in different situations, that there is no one size fits all. So let me take you through some scenarios that might be helpful for you to decide whether or not you should be focusing on gait speed and intensity and distance, or whether or not you should be focusing more on facilitation. If you are in the first 6 months, we know that the brain is the most ripe for rewiring, forming new neural connections on that damaged side of your brain. So I'd say absolutely normalizing movement patterns, i.e., doing some of the exercises in the videos on this channel, is valuable. Why? Because early on, compensation is going to be the brain's default. There are several reasons for this. One is it's behavioral. We're humans, we want to survive, so our brain is going to gravitate towards using the strong arm and the strong leg to walk, to eat, to get dressed, and to get all of our needs met to survive. So that's just the behavioral reality. Now, add to that very early on, you have your stroke, you try and move your involved arm, it doesn't move. When that happens, it's kind of like, this is very simplified, but it's kind of like the injured side of the brain almost shuts down a little bit. And the uninjured side of the brain starts to dominate. Even if you don't have that behavioral response of using your strong arm for everything, just the fact of you trying to move an arm that doesn't move, the uninjured side of the brain gets loud and almost will overpower any attempt that the injured side of the brain does to try and get online. Now, the best way I can describe this as to what's going on in your brain is it is very, very common that I will be telling someone to use or facilitating something with someone's involved arm, and their uninvolved arm is doing it or doing something. That means that the uninjured side of the brain is so loud that the injured side of the brain just has no opportunity to get online. So even more reason that facilitation of the involved side is extremely necessary. We need to get that side of the brain in the game. One therapy that could potentially be beneficial is constraint-induced movement therapy, where you actually constrain the uninvolved arm, the stronger arm. You constrain it, you tie it down. So what happens in that case is you try and use the uninvolved arm and it doesn't do anything, and kind of what was happening on the involved side when you tried to do it and it didn't do anything and that side of the brain just kind of got very quiet. It's kind of like you're flipping that script a little bit, and if you constrain the strong arm, you're hoping that same thing happens. And yes, there have been some studies that show that constraint-induced movement therapy does work. Now, the problem with constraint-induced movement therapy is you have to have some movement on your involved side. You cannot do that if you have no movement on that side. So in that scenario, just giving you guys examples of some things that you might be able to try is mirror therapy works for that. So mirror therapy is you hide the weak arm, the involved arm, you put the stronger arm next to a mirror so that you can see the reflection of that arm in a mirror, and it looks like your involved arm. And I'm doing a whole video on this. Maybe it's already posted. If it's already posted, I will put a link for it in the description below. But basically, you're tricking the brain. Okay, so you're seeing a reflection of your uninvolved arm. And yes, they've done studies on this, and there are areas of the injured side of the brain that actually light up when you see your uninvolved arm's reflection in a mirror. So that's one kind of workaround for people that have no movement. But these strategies are very, very effective in this early stage to try and facilitate movement in an arm that is not working yet. Now, let's talk about a very important component to this acute phase. The other important component is motivation and hope and optimism, which is absolutely so, so, so important. So there is another side of this coin in the acute phase where you want someone to feel like they have autonomy over their life. And not presently, but in the past, when I've had other patients and caregivers who found me on YouTube, they're very, very focused on the facilitation and they don't want their loved one to do anything where they're compensating. But the downside of that, what that means is that that loved one, the person that's had the stroke, is absolutely 1000% dependent on their caregiver for everything. And that really affects motivation, hope, and can do a lot of damage. So there is a balance here, and this is what we're working on right now, or what I'm working on with one patient, is we facilitate a lot, and the caregivers facilitate movement a lot at home. But a very important goal for the patient is to be able to transfer to the toilet and transfer in and out of bed independently. So we're also training a compensatory movement to make sure that she can transfer safely in and out of bed and onto the toilet. There's just something in humans that does not want a loved one or a family member helping them transfer onto a toilet. So it's important to them, but it's also deeply important to me to make sure that someone can do that. In this situation as well, there are some space issues with the living situation. And so taking the wheelchair into certain rooms is not necessarily ideal right now. So she does need to be able to walk short distances in order to be able to access areas of the house that she wants to access. So are there times where she compensates? Absolutely. But we also don't want her to develop something that we call learned non-use, which is what I talked about earlier, that behavioral component of compensation, where you try and use this arm, it doesn't move, and so your brain just starts to become more and more reliant on your strong arm. We call that learned non-use, again, which kind of quiets down the damaged side of the brain or doesn't give it or allow it to kind of come online and start to rewire. So we allow compensation to go to those certain areas, but as much as possible, outside of being able to access these areas of the home, we work on facilitating normal movement patterns. But that brings me to the most important component of this case. This particular patient has tons of family support, tons. Very competent family members that can facilitate normal movement patterns. They should get honorary degrees in physical therapy. They're that good at facilitating normal movement patterns. So it is 1000% realistic that she's going to be able to get the correct or the appropriate amount of repetitions in facilitating normal movement patterns. So we are very much focused more, leaning more towards facilitating normal movement patterns. Let's talk about another scenario that's also very common and probably resonates with a lot of you. Let's say you're in year 3 or you're in year 4 after your stroke. Well, now it's not that your brain isn't going to recover or that it can't rewire on the damaged side, but when you get 3 and 4 and 5 years out, it's going to be a lot harder. It's going to take a lot more work facilitating normal movement patterns, a lot more repetition to get that neural rewiring on the damaged side of the brain. So if you're in that time frame, but you limit your walking because either you're afraid of falling because you're so focused on unlocking your knee, swinging your leg through, relaxing, standing on that leg, all of the cues that I give in a lot of the videos on this channel, that will absolutely not be optimal for functioning in the real world. And why is that? Because we don't think about walking. It is one of those activities that is just automatic. And so if you're still in year 3, 4, or 5 and you don't go out as much because you have a fear of falling because you're so focused on normalizing movement patterns, I would say compensate a little bit. It's okay. What's more important is that you're getting out and you're returning to normal activities in life and that you're maintaining your fitness. So that's another component of all of this. If you've had a stroke, you are in a higher risk category for having another stroke. And what is one thing that can mitigate the risk of having another stroke is movement, steps, walking, zone 2 cardio, HIIT. All of these things that I've talked about recently on this channel are so valuable to mitigating or decreasing the risk of you having another stroke. So if compensating means that you don't have to think so much, you can dual task, meaning you can look at a shopping list and walk at the same time and you don't fear falling, I say compensate. Where else does this come up? If you've had a stroke on the right side of your brain and you are in year 3, 4, or 5, and you still have to wear a gait belt when you go out in the community, and your loved ones still do not feel safe leaving you to transfer on your own or walk on your own, 1000% compensate. Why is this important for the right side of the brain? I've talked about this in other videos, but the left side of the brain is responsible for looking at stuff in silos. Okay. Think about like left brain thinkers and then the right brain thinkers, although I don't fully agree with that whole premise when people say that. But big picture, generally speaking, the left side of the brain is more geared to look at stuff in silos. The right side of the brain is continually coming in and putting all of those pieces into a bigger context. Okay, so think left side of the brain is looking at things in silos, is really zoomed in on different areas of the map. The left side of the brain is coming in and zooming out and looking at all the points on the map as one cohesive picture. When you have damage on the right side of your brain, you have lost that bigger scope that is analyzing and looking at all of those little bits of information in the bigger context. So the risk associated, if you've had damage on the right side of your brain, and people will disagree with me on this, so I will just say it's what I've seen for 20 years, time and time and time and time again. The people that are the most likely to fall are people that have had a stroke on the right side of their brain. Why is that? A perfect example might be you're thirsty. You see a cup of water. You're thirsty. You want to satisfy that thirst. You want to get to that cup of water. That is all you're focused on. You're in that silo. It's not your default. That right side does not automatically come in and zoom out and put all those pieces in context. Wait a minute, is my wheelchair locked? Okay, I've had a stroke. I have weakness on one side of my body. Do I know where my foot is? Do I know where my leg is? All that's out the door because you're thirsty and you want that drink, that glass of water, potentially. So in that moment, that right side has not had that ability or does not zoom back out in the context of you being thirsty and getting up from your wheelchair to walk over to that glass. That's just one example of why the right brain and the left brain, left side of the brain, need to be working very well together, and why when you've had damage to the right side of your brain, you're at a much higher risk of falling. So why do I tell you all that? If you've had damage on the right side of your brain, yes, for the first 2 years, I would say absolutely invest the time into facilitating normal movement patterns. But if you're beyond that 2 years and caregivers are seeing this safety risk based on what I just said, they see you do things where you didn't sequence properly, or you missed a step, or your foot was under the wheelchair and you stood up and you tried to walk and you tripped over your foot, things like that. They see that and they feel like they can't leave you alone. Then take off the table the facilitating normal movement patterns. I promise you, you as a caregiver are going to be so much less stressed out if you take it off the table, and you as a patient are going to have such a higher quality of life because you're not going to be so fearful of falling. You potentially are more fearful of falling, or you have a lot of close calls because you're focused on trying to keep your knee unlocked, trying to swing your leg through. And because you don't have this automatic right brain coming and continually zooming out and putting everything in context to keep you safe, you don't feel safe. And those are just two examples. But what is the bigger picture? What is the best decision for you? And here's where I'm just going to kind of break it down. Again, these are generalities, and there's going to be lots of cases in the middle where I'm not going to address. But if you're in the first 18 months, I say absolutely facilitate outside of therapy. Why? Because most of you are going to in-network providers and all they're working on is gait speed and gait distance. So use this channel or our membership program to put treatment plans together where you're facilitating movement outside of therapy. If you're beyond that 18 months and you are still using a wheelchair to get around, now is the time to start thinking about potentially allowing yourself to compensate for safety. Put a device in your strong hand, whatever device, hemi walker, whatever you can into that strong hand, and walk, 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 walk. You need to start getting on your feet. Then there's another group of you that you've been compensating for 3, 5, 8 years, and now you're starting to have a ton of wrist pain, knee pain on your stronger side. This is an opportunity where you still compensate to get through your day-to-day life, but maybe you start incorporating some facilitation stance control activities where you're working on loading your involved leg outside of your daily activities. So this would be part of therapy to just get a little bit more comfortable on your weaker leg so that you can take some of the pressure off that wrist. Maybe you never get rid of the cane, but maybe you can take some of the pressure off of that wrist. And then along those same lines, for those of you that are in that category that maybe you've been compensating for a really long time, it could be a time to also go back to your orthotist and maybe look at different bracing options to see if potentially there's a different brace. Our bracing needs or your bracing needs will change over your recovery, and many of you are still wearing the same brace that you got in the first or the second year after your stroke. A good fitting brace can absolutely help you to shift more of your weight onto your involved leg. Hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully what I've tried to do is show you or explain to you my thought process and rationale, and why like your therapists that you're seeing in network are not necessarily doing anything wrong, but they're probably using protocols that are based on like old data when we really didn't believe that people could rewire their brain as adults. Add to that, they're under pressure to hit productivity standards, so they really don't have the time. and this is kind of a hot take, but I just know this from experience, the more variety they add to your home exercise program, the longer it takes to write your note, which isn't a huge deal, but it's a reality, and they are under extreme pressure to get their notes done same day, while at the same time they have a productivity standard of having to see a certain number of patients. And then add to that, if they're doing a lot of facilitation techniques during your treatment session, they can't document, which that's a topic for another video. Therapists shouldn't be documenting during your treatment sessions anyway, but it's just the reality of the world given their productivity standards and all the documentation they have to do. So they're not doing anything wrong. They are learning how to function in a broken system, in my opinion. But then also, it just takes a lot more creativity, and I can only speak from experience. Like, a treatment session doesn't end when the person leaves the gym. Like, I think about people into the night while I'm walking, trying to figure out, like, how do I facilitate that one movement? It just takes more time. Just to walk someone around a circle doesn't take a whole lot of time, or thought, or planning, or creativity. So that's one side of the coin. But the other side of the coin is there are many of you that probably do need to focus on high intensity walking for the physiologic benefits, the cardiovascular benefits. So that's another whole reason that is absolutely valid as to why some of your therapists are just working on gait speed. But we can't ignore the fact that there are all those other things that I mentioned as well. So hopefully this will help some of you to decide, should you be working on quality movement, facilitating normal movement patterns, or should you and your caregivers be more open-minded to a little bit of compensation to improve your overall quality of life, your overall cardiovascular fitness, and your ability to have purpose and meaning, because you can do the things in your life that bring you that purpose and meaning because you can compensate a little bit. So I hope all of that made sense. I enjoyed spending time with y'all today. Don't forget, if you want to go a little bit deeper in your neurologic recovery and you want more ideas and techniques and tools to facilitate normal movement patterns, you are a perfect fit for our Gold membership program. To learn more about our membership program, or to schedule a call with someone in person where you can describe your situation and see if our program is right for you, you can visit rehab-hq.com. I enjoyed spending time with y'all today, and I'll see you in the next video. Have a good day.